humid summer of 1866, deep in the rural heart of Mississippi, a peculiar household stood quietly amid the endless fields and thick forests. From the outside, it appeared ordinary, a modest cabin, its timbers weathered by years of storms and sun, smoke curling lazily from a crooked chimney, but behind its walls, a story unfolded that would perplex neighbors for decades. Inside lived a woman and two men, brothers, whose connection defied conventional understanding. The local community whispered about the household in hushed tones, speaking in partial sentences and furtive glances. No one knew their names, only their arrangement, the brothers, the woman, and the silence that clung to them like a shadow. The woman, delicate yet resilient, moved through the cabin with a quiet purpose, tending to the sparse furnishings, lighting the hearth, and maintaining a semblance of domestic order. She carried herself with a composure that hinted at both strength and resignation, her eyes constantly scanning the room, alert to subtle cues in the behavior of the two men. The brothers themselves were alike in stature, both tall and broad-shouldered, their hands roughened by years of labor. They spoke rarely in the presence of outsiders, their words clipped and measured, their gazes often fixed upon the distant trees or the dirt floor beneath their feet. Observers noted an unspoken tension between them, a mixture of fraternal familiarity and an underlying, almost imperceptible rivalry. Local accounts describe the first signs of curiosity from the neighbors. Children passing near the cabin claimed to see shadows moving behind curtained windows, figures bending toward one another in ways that suggested secret conversations. Animals behaved strangely, horses refusing to graze nearby, dogs growling without provocation, and birds avoiding the surrounding orchard. One elderly farmer recalled hearing laughter, low and unsteady, echoing late into the night, though when he peered through the darkness, he saw nothing but the faint glow of the cabin fire and the two men standing silently on the porch. Rumors swirled with the inevitability of gossip in isolated communities. Neighbors speculated about the nature of the arrangement inside the cabin, a shared household certainly, but why the brothers and the woman? Letters passed quietly between families in nearby counties, each offering theories rooted in morality, social norms, and the unspoken anxieties of post-Civil War Mississippi. Some suspected coercion, others consent intertwined with necessity. The mystery deepened because the inhabitants themselves never explained their lives to outsiders. They moved with discretion, aware that the prying eyes of the community were as much a threat as any storm or hardship. Even the natural world seemed to respond to their presence. The humid Mississippi air carried the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and when the wind shifted, it brought whispers from the forest that locals described as unnerving, almost human. Nights were punctuated by the faint creak of cabin timbers, the low hum of insects, and the occasional echo of footsteps in the dirt outside. Those who dared approach reported feeling an inexplicable weight, as if the land itself held a secret and demanded reverence. A farmer passing by in the early evening swore he saw a figure at the window, thin and indistinct, staring outward. Eyes locked on the horizon, yet seeming to penetrate the onlooker's thoughts. Inside the cabin, daily life continued in patterns both mundane and bizarre. Observers noted that the brothers took turns performing chores, but in ways that subtly mirrored one another. Meals were prepared quietly, eaten in almost ritualistic silence, and the woman managed both men's schedules with a precision that suggested experience, vigilance, and an understanding of the delicate balance that sustained their unusual household. Outsiders described an aura of suspense that lingered around the home, a palpable tension that made casual conversation feel intrusive and unsafe. It was not only neighbors who felt the strange gravity of the cabin. Travelers passing through reported discomfort upon glimpsing the property from a distance. They described sensations of unease, a creeping anxiety that clung to their minds long after they had left the area. One preacher on circuit duty recalled standing on a nearby hilltop at dusk, watching the cabin. The wind carried faint sounds, snippets of conversation, laughter, perhaps argument, though no movement could be discerned. He left with a note in his journal. There is something in that place older than the war, older than the soil itself, waiting quietly for acknowledgement. The first documented local inquiry into the household occurred when a neighbor noticed signs of conflict, broken tools near the shed, a chair overturned in the living room, and traces of mud tracked across the cabin floor. When questioned, the brothers offered no explanation, only a terse nod toward the woman, who met the outsider's gaze with a steady calm. The lack of explanation only heightened the mystery. Over time, patterns emerged that were difficult to reconcile with ordinary life. Visitors recorded irregularities in behavior, simultaneous laughter and silence, meals prepared for an unusual number of participants, and subtle gestures that seemed to communicate volumes without words. The uniqueness of the household drew attention from outside counties, particularly from those interested in social anomalies. Early newspaper mentions, sparse and cautious, framed the situation as unusual, but left interpretation largely to the imagination. Anthropologists and later historians have speculated about post-war social conditions, scarcity of partners, and the flexibility of familial structures under extreme circumstances. But even these analyses cannot fully capture the lived experience of the cabin. In the darkness of evening, when cicadas buzzed and the air grew thick with humidity, observers reported a heightened sense of tension around the property. Shadows seemed longer, sounds sharper, and the occasional glance into the cabin revealed figures seated in silence, their postures rigid, their faces unreadable. It was during these hours that the sense of the uncanny, the quiet horror, was most pronounced. The balance of domestic life and secrecy, of familiarity and the grotesque, held the attention of any witness with an almost magnetic pull. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and violet, the cabin stood as a silent monument to its inhabitants' unusual existence. Nothing about the household was overtly sinister. Yet the air of mystery, the disciplined yet unsettling routines, and the subtle interactions between the brothers and the woman created an experience that lingered in memory. It was a story that demanded observation, reflection, and careful interpretation. A quiet but compelling invitation into the shadowed corners of human social arrangement. For anyone approaching the property, the question remained: what circumstances had brought these three individuals together in such an unconventional and secretive bond? And what stories, unspoken and unseen, did the walls of that Mississippi cabin hold? In these questions lay the hook, the tension that would draw observers, scholars, and curious travelers into a narrative both deeply human and quietly horrifying, where every glance, every movement carried the weight of history, morality, and mystery intertwined. The cabin, its inhabitants, and the surrounding land became a theater of subtle terror and fascination, a place where silence spoke volumes and the ordinary was complicated by layers of human behavior, societal expectation, and cultural upheaval. It was here, in this liminal space between curiosity and dread, that the story of the brothers who shared one bride began, a tale that would linger far beyond the sun-drenched fields and into the imaginations of those willing to witness its quiet horror. Mississippi in 1866 was a land still reeling from the recent devastation of the Civil War. The rivers ran with the echoes of conflict, and the soil itself bore the weight of reconstruction, both literal and metaphorical. Plantations had fallen into disrepair, towns were recovering from occupation and skirmishes, and families faced the uncertainty of survival in a landscape marked by loss, scarcity, and shifting social structures. It was into this environment that the story of the three mysterious inhabitants unfolded, a narrative shaped as much by circumstance as by personal choice. Rural life dominated the Mississippi Delta and surrounding counties. Families lived in cabins and modest homes, working the land from dawn until dusk. Corn, cotton, and subsistence crops provided the backbone of daily existence, while livestock, pigs, chickens, and the occasional cow offered sustenance and trade opportunities. Labor was grueling, often performed by extended family units, hired hands, or formerly enslaved individuals now navigating freedom under restrictive economic and social conditions. Every household relied on strict routines, seasonal cycles, and a careful allocation of resources. In this context, survival required cooperation, flexibility, and sometimes unconventional arrangements. The war had left deep scars, socially and culturally. Men returning from battle often found their families disrupted, homes destroyed, or local hierarchies upended. Communities struggled to redefine relationships, inheritance, and property rights, particularly in areas where the population had been reduced or displaced. Women, who had managed households in the absence of men, now faced the dual challenge of rebuilding both domestic stability and social respectability. The concept of marriage, family, and gender roles remained highly structured. Yet the realities of post-war scarcity and imbalance occasionally led to arrangements that diverged from conventional expectations. In such a society, the notion of two brothers sharing one bride would have been scandalous. Marriage was both a legal and moral institution, underpinned by community approval and reinforced by religious doctrine. Yet in isolated rural settings, enforcement of norms could be inconsistent, and local traditions often bent in the face of necessity. It is within these ambiguities that the household in question emerged. Economic pressures, population shortages, and the practicalities of managing a farm or homestead may have influenced the arrangement, alongside the personal choices and mutual consent of the individuals involved. Religion played a central role in shaping social conduct. Churches dotted the landscape, serving not only as houses of worship, but also as centers for social cohesion and moral guidance. Ministers were influential, offering counsel, enforcing norms, and mediating disputes. Sermons often addressed the consequences of transgression, emphasizing virtue, obedience, and the maintenance of social order. In communities like those surrounding the mysterious cabin, deviation from expected behavior drew attention, whispers, and sometimes outright intervention. Yet the family's ability to maintain privacy, coupled with the isolation of their property, allowed them to operate in relative secrecy, navigating a delicate balance between societal expectation and personal circumstance. The cultural context of Mississippi at the time was also influenced by folklore, superstition, and oral tradition. Stories of witches, spirits, and curses were not merely entertainment. They provided frameworks for understanding events that defied immediate explanation. In communities recovering from trauma, such narratives often served as tools for processing grief, fear, and uncertainty. The whispers surrounding the cabin, the subtle disturbances noted by neighbors, and the persistent rumors can be seen as extensions of this cultural lens, blending observation with imagination and reality with interpretation. Medical understanding in the mid-19th century was rudimentary by modern standards. Physicians relied on observation, rudimentary chemistry, and anecdotal evidence, and diagnoses were often intertwined with moral judgments. Conditions that might be explained today through psychology or sociology were frequently framed as moral failings or spiritual afflictions. The unconventional household arrangement likely drew scrutiny not only from the community, but also from traveling doctors and ministers, who interpreted behavior through the limited knowledge and cultural biases of their time. The economy of rural Mississippi further complicated social structures. Land was often divided among heirs and property disputes were common. Labor shortages made cooperative arrangements necessary, particularly on farms where physical work was demanding and resources scarce. Sharing labor, shelter, and responsibilities was not unusual. What set the cabin apart was the intimate and socially controversial nature of the household. Scholars have since speculated that practical considerations, such as the division of chores, care of livestock, and protection of property, may have intersected with personal relationships to create the unconventional configuration observed by neighbors. Isolation shaped perception as much as circumstance. Communities were spread across vast tracts of farmland, connected by dirt roads, rivers, and small towns. News traveled slowly, and outsiders often relied on second-hand accounts, exaggerated tales, and conjecture. In this environment, unusual arrangements, whether innocent, strategic, or morally ambiguous, could quickly acquire an air of mystery, fear, or fascination. For the brothers and the woman, this meant that every action, however mundane, was subject to interpretation, rumor, and scrutiny, amplifying the tension inherent in their daily existence. Education was limited and uneven. Literacy rates varied, particularly in rural areas recovering from war, and formal schooling was often reserved for boys, with girls receiving minimal instruction. Knowledge of law, inheritance, and social customs was primarily transmitted orally, through community elders, religious instruction, and practical experience. The inhabitants of the cabin likely understood the boundaries of acceptable behavior, even as they navigated choices that pushed the edges of social acceptability. This understanding shaped not only their interactions with one another, but also their careful management of interactions with outsiders. The physical environment itself influenced daily life and social perception. Mississippi's swamps, forests, and rivers created both opportunities and hazards. Travel was often difficult, isolation pronounced, and the rhythms of nature imposed strict demands. Seasonal flooding, harsh summers, and unpredictable weather shaped not only the economy but also interpersonal dynamics, reinforcing a reliance on family units and cooperative strategies. In such conditions, an unconventional household could survive precisely because it adapted to the demands of the environment, balancing labor, sustenance, and protection while navigating societal scrutiny. In sum, the historical context of post-Civil War Mississippi provides critical insight into the household's existence. Economic scarcity, labor demands, social expectation, religious influence, folklore, and isolation combined to create a landscape in which unconventional arrangements could persist, yet also provoke fascination, fear, and speculation. The cabin, its occupants, and their daily lives cannot be understood apart from this environment, a world defined by both survival and societal pressure, where morality, necessity, and secrecy intertwined in complex ways. The story of the brothers and their shared bride is inseparable from this broader narrative. It is a tale rooted in the material and cultural realities of its time, shaped by forces both visible and invisible, historical and human. By understanding the environment, the social norms, and the pressures of life in 1866 Mississippi, observers can begin to contextualize the mysterious household, even as its specific details remain obscured by time, secrecy, and human reticence. In this context, the cabin emerges not merely as a dwelling but as a stage for a unique human drama. The story invites reflection on how individuals navigate societal constraints, scarcity, and morality, and how isolation and secrecy amplify the ordinary into something uncanny. It is within these conditions that the mystery begins to take shape, a quiet tension that lingers beneath the surface of daily life, setting the stage for the incidents, reactions, and haunting events yet to be recounted. Life in the cabin unfolded with a rhythm that seemed ordinary at first glance, yet each day carried an undercurrent of tension that outsiders could sense immediately. Early mornings brought labor in the fields, where the brothers moved with synchronized precision, carrying tools, chopping wood, or tending livestock. Yet even these mundane tasks occasionally turned alarming. On one particular morning, a wooden plow handle snapped under the weight of labor, striking one of the brothers across the forearm. Blood seeped slowly into the dirt, staining it dark. The reaction of the other brother was both immediate and measured. He pressed a rough cloth to the wound, his hands trembling slightly, his gaze flicking to the woman as if seeking affirmation that all would be managed. Neighbors watching from a distance noted the intensity of the scene, the unusual combination of care and tension, and the silence that settled after the incident like a heavy fog. Accidents continued, each seeming minor on its own, yet collectively contributing to the mounting unease. A misstep while tending to the barn stairs resulted in a severe fall. A splintered piece of timber drew a startled gasp from the woman as she instinctively reached to steady him. She moved between them with an almost ritualistic attention, aware of the fragility inherent in each gesture. Observers from the surrounding fields reported the sight. A woman mediating between two strong men, maintaining an invisible equilibrium, each movement precise, calculated, yet punctuated by moments of sudden tension. The incidents grew stranger with the passage of weeks. An axe slipped during a wood-cutting task, narrowly missing the woman's shoulder. A knife used for preparing livestock meat slipped from a brother's hand and embedded itself into the floor inches from his foot. In each case, the response was calm, almost rehearsed. The woman would step forward, offering silent instruction, while the brothers adjusted their positions or exchanged brief nods. Outsiders watching noted the simultaneous fear and familiarity in these moments, as if danger had become an intrinsic part of their domestic choreography. Neighboring families began to discuss what they saw with hushed urgency. One farmer, standing on the edge of his field, recalled seeing a figure stumble across the yard, bloodied from minor cuts. Yet both men and the woman continued without apparent distress. The farm became a stage for repeated small-scale emergencies, each leaving traces. Mud, tools askew, the faint odor of iron in the air, that amplified the aura of suspense surrounding the household. Reports circulated that nightfall brought additional incidents: livestock missing, objects inexplicably moved, and shadows that stretched unnaturally across the cabin walls. One evening, a sudden scream shattered the quiet. The woman had been outside tending to a fire when one brother, carrying a heavy bucket of water, tripped on uneven ground. The bucket spilled, water splashing across her feet, and in the struggle, a shallow cut opened along his knuckle. The sound of metal striking stone and the gasp of the woman echoed across the yard. The neighbor, who later recounted the story, noted the precise, almost ritualistic way the woman administered aid, pressing a cloth, murmuring words inaudible to those beyond the fence, her hands steady, her eyes unwavering. The brother receiving care remained silent, watching her with attention that suggested both reliance and unease. As weeks progressed, incidents shifted from accidental injury to moments that carried an almost uncanny quality. On more than one occasion, one brother would appear to anticipate the other's movements, shifting position in the barn or fields to avoid collision or mishap. Observers remarked on the fluid, near-telepathic coordination between the two men, guided in large part by the silent direction of the woman. Yet this coordination sometimes faltered, producing tense confrontations, arguments flaring briefly, tools thrown in frustration, voices raised and immediately silenced as the woman intervened. Each episode seemed to reinforce the fragile equilibrium of the household, as if the cabin itself demanded careful management to prevent chaos. Outside the home, the land seemed to react to these dynamics. Horses refused to approach the barn, dogs would whine or growl without clear provocation, and the wind carried sounds that neighbors described as indistinct whispers. Some reported faint cries in the distance, others noted the eerie echo of laughter that could not be traced to any visible source. Children passing nearby claimed to see figures in the windows, standing rigid, faces unreadable, while shadows flickered across the floor as if anticipating movement before it occurred. One particularly dramatic incident occurred when the brothers attempted to repair the roof after a violent thunderstorm. A loose plank shifted, sending one man sliding perilously toward the edge. The woman, already atop the lower rungs of a ladder, reached instinctively, catching him just in time. The plank splintered beneath their feet, leaving both exposed to the elements and the potential for serious injury. Observers on distant hills reported seeing the tableau: a woman suspended midair, gripping a man, another standing tensely, hands ready, muscles coiled. The scene held a tension so palpable that witnesses later described a physical sensation of dread, as if the air itself had thickened. Minor accidents became frequent, each contributing to the oppressive aura of suspense. Splinters, bruises, and cuts were nearly constant, yet none were life-threatening on their own. Still, the accumulation of these incidents created a persistent sense of unease for neighbors and travelers. Each morning, the cabin appeared both ordinary and strangely menacing, a place where survival depended not only on skill and labor, but on a delicate balance of coordination, anticipation, and silent communication. Observers began to note behavioral patterns beyond physical accidents. The brothers occasionally withdrew into silence, staring at the horizon for hours, while the woman moved among them with quiet attention. Tools would be arranged meticulously, meals prepared in strict rotation, and every small mishap met with measured response. Outsiders recorded a growing sense of ritual in their daily lives, a repetition that bordered on obsessive yet seemed essential to maintaining equilibrium. Some incidents took a darker turn. A fall from a hayloft left a severe bruise and a minor fracture. A scythe slipped while harvesting grass, narrowly missing flesh. A knife accident during meat preparation caused deep lacerations on a wooden surface, sending sharp sounds echoing through the cabin. Each event drew attention from neighbors who speculated about violence, incompetence, or misfortune. Yet when investigated, the household revealed only careful attention, resilience, and the persistent but quiet management of risk. Evenings often brought the most unsettling incidents. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. Whispers carried on the humid wind. Sudden chills descended inside the cabin without apparent cause. Those who ventured close reported the sensation of being watched, of sounds and movements barely perceptible, yet impossible to ignore. The atmosphere was suffused with a quiet horror, the sense that ordinary life was intertwined with forces beyond perception, that even mundane tasks could erupt into moments of tension and dread. As time passed, the accumulation of these incidents, accidents, falls, tool mishaps, and subtle interactions constructed a narrative that both fascinated and terrified observers. The household's careful management of risk, the fluid coordination between the brothers, and the silent authority of the woman created a tableau that was extraordinary in its quiet intensity. Each event reinforced the perception that this was not merely a domestic arrangement, but a carefully balanced ecosystem, fragile, tense, and unyielding to intrusion. In the eyes of the surrounding community, the cabin became a locus of curiosity, speculation, and fear. Stories of falls, splinters, narrow escapes, and uncanny coordination circulated widely, each retelling amplifying the mysterious quality of the household. Outsiders struggled to reconcile the ordinary with the unsettling, the mundane with the almost ritualistic management of accidents and near mishaps. By the end of the first year, the incidents had become legendary, embedded in the collective memory of the local population. The farm and cabin were recognized as spaces where the ordinary intersected with the uncanny, where daily life included a choreography of accidents, near misses, and silent interventions. Observers recorded the effects on mental and emotional perception, a lingering tension, heightened awareness, and the subtle influence of the household's unusual dynamics on the surrounding landscape. The household, with its strange patterns and repeated incidents, did not exist in isolation. The community around the cabin was small, closely knit, and deeply observant. Word of the unusual domestic arrangement spread quickly, first through whispers and passing conversations, then in letters exchanged between families, and eventually reaching the ears of local officials, ministers, and even wandering journalists. Each observer came with their own assumptions, biases, and curiosity, attempting to reconcile the visible reality of the cabin with the social and moral framework of the time. Neighbors were the first to respond in tangible ways. Some avoided the property entirely, diverting travel routes, keeping children indoors during chores, and warning newcomers of the peculiar household. Others observed from a distance, noting routines, minor accidents, and the careful balance maintained between the three inhabitants. A few brave families attempted engagement, sending small gifts or polite greetings, but often withdrew after receiving no response or sensing the intense scrutiny that the cabin seemed to project outward. The air of mystery and subtle threat created by the household's behavior influenced the behavior of the surrounding population, shaping interactions, travel, and social engagement. Local clergy took particular interest. Ministers and visiting pastors interpreted the arrangement through the lens of morality and spiritual doctrine. Sermons began to reference the dangers of unconventional unions, the importance of obedience to social norms, and the need for vigilance in guiding parishioners away from moral transgressions. One pastor, who later recorded his experiences in a private journal, described standing near the cabin at dusk, feeling a presence heavier than the earth, as if sin and secrecy were layered into the soil itself. His interpretations reflected both the spiritual framework of the time and the unnerving nature of the household's disciplined yet unusual behavior. Doctors, who were occasionally called to treat minor injuries sustained during labor or household accidents, observed the family with clinical curiosity. Medical understanding in the 19th century was limited, and diagnoses often intertwined physical, psychological, and moral considerations. Physicians recorded the unusual patterns of coordination between the brothers, the subtle authority exercised by the woman, and the unusual stress reactions visible in each family member. Notes in their journals referenced heightened vigilance who ritualized responses to accidents and behavior that borders on obsessive control of domestic hazards. Some suggested underlying psychological conditions. Others posited social adaptation to isolation and scarcity. Despite these analyses, no definitive explanation could be reached, leaving the household enveloped in mystery even to trained professionals. The press contributed to the shaping of public perception, albeit cautiously. Newspapers from nearby towns published short accounts of curious domestic arrangements and anomalous household conduct, leaving many details vague. Editors, aware of the sensational potential yet constrained by limited first-hand reporting, relied on neighbor testimonies and scattered letters. The ambiguity of these reports fueled speculation and rumor, amplifying the sense of unease surrounding the cabin. Headlines hinted at scandal without confirming wrongdoing, encouraging the community to observe silently while discussions in private circles filled the gaps with conjecture. Psychological responses among the community were notable. Children, sensitive to patterns of behavior and subtle tension, reported nightmares, hesitation to approach the fields, and a persistent sense of dread. Adults described feelings of unease, subtle anxiety, and the sense that the land itself was watching. These perceptions were reinforced by the repetition of incidents, falls, near accidents, unexplained noises that gave ordinary life a slightly sinister undertone. Some neighbors speculated about curses, supernatural influence, or divine punishment, interpreting natural occurrences in light of their cultural and religious beliefs. Community leaders occasionally attempted intervention. Town councils, elders, and respected families discussed whether to enforce social norms more rigorously or to leave the household undisturbed. Recommendations ranged from moral counsel to formal petitions, though enforcement was complicated by the isolation of the property and the careful discretion of the household's inhabitants. Each attempted intervention revealed both the resilience of the family and the limits of community influence, highlighting the delicate balance between societal expectations and private agency in rural Mississippi life. Letters preserved from the era provide insight into broader reactions. A farmer's letter to a relative in a neighboring county describes, "They live as if the world cannot touch them, yet we sense a tension that prickles the skin." A woman writing to her sister noted, "I dare not go near the cabin, yet my eyes are drawn to it daily, wondering what holds them together and what shadows linger behind their doors." These accounts illustrate the mixture of fear, fascination, and moral judgment that shaped communal understanding, showing how narrative and perception intertwined in the construction of social meaning. Academic analysis in later decades highlighted the interplay between social, economic, and environmental factors in shaping reactions. The post-war scarcity, isolation, and disrupted social hierarchies contributed to both the unusual arrangement and the community's perception of it. Historians emphasize that curiosity, anxiety, and moral scrutiny were amplified in small communities with limited mobility and strong oral traditions. Behavioral patterns that might have been ignored elsewhere became remarkable, generating stories that persisted across generations. The local community's interpretation of events was deeply influenced by gender roles and expectations. The woman's authority over the two men challenged conventional hierarchies, creating both admiration and suspicion. Her competence in managing accidents, mediating conflict, and maintaining household balance was essential to survival, yet it also subverted expectations of female passivity. Observers struggled to reconcile her visible strength with societal norms, adding a layer of moral judgment to their curiosity. Ultimately, the reactions of society, neighbors, clergy, physicians, journalists formed a tapestry of observation, speculation, and interpretation. No single perspective dominated, and no definitive conclusion emerged. Instead, a pattern of cautious observation, whispered discussion, and growing legend took shape. The household became both a social curiosity and a locus of unease, reflecting broader cultural anxieties about gender, morality, and the post-war reorganization of rural life. In the eyes of those who observed from the periphery, the incidents, behaviors, and rhythms of the cabin reinforced a sense of quiet horror. Ordinary life, the preparation of meals, tending of animals, repair of tools, was suffused with tension, ritual, and precision. Each interaction, accident, or adjustment held meaning, not only for the family but for the larger community, which watched, whispered, and speculated, never fully comprehending the underlying dynamics. The household's existence and the reactions it provoked highlight a persistent tension between societal expectation and personal circumstance. The brothers and their shared bride navigated survival, social scrutiny, and emotional balance in ways that were extraordinary for their time and place. Community responses, fear, fascination, intervention, observation, illuminate the cultural framework in which the household functioned, showing how social, psychological, and moral factors intersected in shaping perception, behavior, and legend. By the end of this period, the cabin and its inhabitants had achieved a dual status, a real, functioning household navigating daily hazards, and a symbol in local consciousness of what lies beyond conventional understanding. Stories circulated not merely to entertain, but to interpret, caution, and memorialize, embedding the events and behaviors into the collective memory of the region. It was a testimony to the way humans process the unusual, the unsettling, and the morally ambiguous, an enduring narrative of curiosity, dread, and fascination. The tension that had long simmered within the cabin reached a silent crescendo one late summer evening. The sun had dipped behind the thick Mississippi trees, casting long shadows across the fields and painting the cabin walls with a crimson glow. Inside, the three figures moved with a quiet intensity, each aware of the other's presence and every subtle motion. The rhythm of ordinary life, preparing dinner, tending the hearth, repairing tools, was undercut by an almost imperceptible anxiety, a shared anticipation of an event yet unseen. It began with a minor accident, a slip while carrying water from the well. The bucket tipped, sending cold liquid splashing across the floor. The woman moved swiftly, steadying one of the brothers who had nearly lost his footing. The other brother's gaze sharpened, tension visible in the taut lines of his face. Observers who later recounted glimpses through the trees described the scene as charged with electric anticipation, though no words were exchanged. It was the kind of silent moment that expands in the mind, where every heartbeat is magnified and every shadow seems to tremble. The incidents escalated quickly. A storm rolled in from the west, heavy clouds blotting out the remaining light and turning the cabin into a shadowed interior. Wind rattled the window panes and branches lashed against the wooden walls. The brothers moved with urgent efficiency, securing doors and windows, stacking firewood against the walls, and checking the livestock. Each gesture was precise yet fraught with unspoken tension. The woman, usually composed, moved among them with a speed and intensity that suggested both fear and determination. It was a choreography born of years of careful management, yet now heightened by the storm, by isolation, and by the unspoken awareness that their equilibrium might not hold. As night fell, the storm intensified. Thunder boomed, rattling the cabin timbers, while lightning illuminated the yard in stark, fleeting bursts. A tree branch, loosened by the wind, crashed against the roof, sending shards of wood scattering across the floor. One brother instinctively moved to shield the woman, but in the tight space of the cabin, the other was too close, and the collision caused a brief, sharp altercation. Shouts rang out, startling animals and neighbors alike, yet within moments, the trio resumed their careful coordination, adjusting positions, tending injuries, and restoring order. The storm seemed almost to test them, pushing each to the edge of endurance, both physically and psychologically. Outside, observers reported an uncanny stillness beyond the storm, a quiet that made the air feel heavier. Shadows of the cabin flickered against the darkened sky, appearing to stretch and move independently of the occupants. Some claimed to hear low murmurs or whispers in the wind, as if the storm itself carried the echoes of the household's internal tensions. Children from neighboring farms peered cautiously from a distance, gripping each other's hands, their wide eyes reflecting the flashes of lightning and the sense of something unearthly in the combination of human drama and natural fury. Inside, the most critical moment arrived when the roof began to leak heavily. Water pooled along the cabin floor, slicking the wooden boards and creating a hazard for those moving about in the dim light. The woman directed both brothers simultaneously, indicating which tasks to prioritize, correcting positions with precise gestures. One brother attempted to secure a tarp outside, only to slip on the mud-soaked earth, tearing a hand against the wooden fence. The other reacted instantly, grabbing him before he fell, but their movement collided with the woman stepping forward to assist. For a tense second, chaos seemed imminent, yet through subtle adjustments, they regained balance. Witnesses described the scene as almost ritualistic, a terrifying display of coordination under duress, where the stakes were both practical and psychological. The storm continued its assault, rain hammering against the walls and windows, wind shrieking through gaps in the cabin. Objects shifted, dishes slid across counters, and the dim fire cast flickering shadows across every surface. A sense of confinement intensified the atmosphere. The small space, already charged with tension, became a pressure cooker of fear, anticipation, and silent negotiation. The woman moved constantly between the two brothers, guiding, correcting, and occasionally interjecting a sharp gesture or word to prevent minor accidents from escalating into disaster. At one point, a sudden crack of lightning struck dangerously close to the property. The sound was deafening, shaking the cabin and momentarily blinding the occupants in its stark flash. Instinctively, they froze, each aware of the other's presence, their pulse racing in synchronization. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. broken only by the relentless patter of rain and the low groan of the timbers. Neighbors later recalled this moment as one of profound terror, describing a feeling that extended beyond the cabin, an unsettling awareness that the storm and the household were intertwined in some inexplicable tension, each influencing the other. Emergent patterns of danger revealed themselves in subtle ways. The floorboards, slick with water, became a hazard for the already fatigued brothers. The fire needed constant attention to prevent extinguishment. Tools and utensils shifted unpredictably under the storm's force. Each new challenge heightened the suspense, testing not only physical endurance but also emotional resilience. The woman's control over the household became increasingly visible, her rapid decision-making and calm demeanor juxtaposed against the raw fear and urgency of the moment. Observers described a palpable mixture of awe and dread, recognizing both the skill and the fragility of the system maintained within the cabin. As midnight approached, the storm began to abate, leaving a thick, damp quiet in its wake. The three figures inside the cabin, exhausted but unharmed, paused in a moment of reflection and relief. The air was dense, carrying the scent of wet earth and scorched wood. Shadows played across the walls, and every creak of the cabin seemed magnified in the darkness. In that pause, one could sense the tension that had dominated their lives reaching a temporary release. Yet the fragility of their arrangement remained apparent, a silent acknowledgement of the precarious balance that held their household together. Neighbors, now able to cautiously observe the aftermath, noted an eerie calm. The storm had passed, yet the atmosphere retained a sense of unresolved tension. The cabin appeared as if it had absorbed the intensity of the night, radiating an aura that was both protective and threatening. The actions of the three inhabitants, their coordination, and their resilience became legend among the surrounding population, their ordeal a testament to human adaptability under extreme circumstances. In the wake of this climactic night, the household achieved a kind of mythic status. Tales of their survival, their coordination, and the almost ritualistic precision of their responses circulated widely, blending observation with imagination. The story became emblematic of a boundary between ordinary life and quiet horror, illustrating how human behavior, social dynamics, and environmental pressures could converge into moments of profound suspense and psychological intensity. The storm, the near accidents, and the silent negotiation of danger encapsulated the tension that defined the household's existence. It was a moment where human skill, instinct, and endurance were tested, revealing both the extraordinary capabilities and vulnerabilities of the three figures at the heart of the cabin. In the eyes of observers, the night became a crystallized image of suspense, drama, and the uncanny interplay between domestic life and uncontrollable natural forces. By sunrise, the cabin stood intact, its occupants physically unharmed but emotionally changed. The storm had passed, yet the story remained, a testament to the tension, skill, and quiet terror that characterized the household. It was a climax not defined by catastrophe or violence alone, but by the interplay of human endurance, environmental challenge, and the persistent, almost palpable aura of mystery surrounding the arrangement of the brothers and their shared bride. As decades passed, the cabin and its occupants faded from the immediate memory of neighbors, yet the legend persisted. The fields where labor had once unfolded in a rhythm punctuated by minor accidents grew wild, the fences rotting and tilting under the weight of years. The farmhouse itself, once a stage for precise choreography and quiet tension, slowly succumbed to decay. Wood splintered, roof beams sagged, and the windows, through which so many observers had glimpsed the interplay of the three figures, became opaque with dust and time. The land absorbed the echoes of daily life, leaving traces only in subtle impressions. A depression in the earth where livestock had rested, a stone moved out of place by hurried footsteps, or a faint path winding toward the fields. Stories of the household circulated among successive generations. Children learned of the brothers and the woman through whispered tales, passed along by parents who had never personally observed the events. These narratives became infused with legend, the minor accidents of daily life magnified into episodes of quiet horror. The careful coordination among the three transformed into an uncanny telepathy. The woman's authority became mythologized, portrayed as both benevolent and unnervingly absolute. Outsiders often interpreted the tale as a moral caution, a story of transgression and endurance, while those within the county treated It is a mysterious reality that blurred the lines between ordinary domestic life and the extraordinary. The precise details of the household, how the brothers coordinated, how the woman maintained balance, the nature of their interpersonal dynamics, remained obscured by time. There was no record of official inquiry that could definitively explain their arrangement or the psychological and practical methods that allowed them to navigate constant tension. Researchers and historians later speculated on possible explanations: adaptive responses to post-war scarcity, complex social contracts, or even subtle psychological mechanisms of control and cooperation developed in isolation. Yet no evidence conclusively clarified the underlying reality, leaving room for interpretation, speculation, and imagination. Observers at the time had often tried to rationalize what they saw through available frameworks: moral, spiritual, or practical. Ministers spoke of sin, redemption, and the testing of human character. Physicians invoked early psychological and physical theories to account for patterns of behavior. Neighbors speculated about hidden motives, curses, or divine intervention. Each perspective offered partial insight, but failed to capture the totality of the household's dynamics. The ambiguity, preserved by secrecy and the passage of time, is what gives the story its enduring tension and unsettling resonance. In the years following the household's active period, researchers noted parallels with other isolated, high-pressure domestic arrangements in rural post-war America. Patterns emerged: reliance on precise coordination, emphasis on risk mitigation, and the subtle hierarchy maintained by one individual who assumed a central role in managing both labor and interpersonal dynamics. In the case of the brothers and their shared bride, these patterns were intensified by the combination of environmental hazards, social scrutiny, and personal adaptation. Observers today recognize this as a unique intersection of circumstance, necessity, and human ingenuity, framed within a context that produced both fascination and fear. The psychological dimension of the household has drawn attention in later studies. Scholars have proposed that the stress of isolation, labor intensity, and societal pressure created an environment in which hypervigilance and silent communication became essential. Accidents, minor injuries, and near misses functioned as both practical challenges and reinforcement of shared patterns of behavior. The woman's authority, exercised with precision, may be understood as a stabilizing force, her presence preventing chaos while simultaneously reinforcing a sense of unease that fascinated observers. This duality, control paired with quiet horror, is central to the story's enduring resonance. Local folklore preserves subtle details that historical records often omitted. Travelers spoke of lights flickering in the abandoned cabin, sounds of movement where no human was present, and the faint impression of figures passing along the old paths. These tales, while anecdotal, contributed to the mythology surrounding the farm. The ordinary was transformed into the uncanny. The rhythms of survival became imbued with a spectral quality, creating a narrative space where history, legend, and human imagination intertwined. The cultural memory of the household also reflects broader questions about human adaptation and morality. How do individuals navigate constraints imposed by scarcity, isolation, or societal judgment? How do communities interpret behaviors that diverge from convention? In the case of the brothers and their shared bride, these questions remain unanswered. The household becomes a lens through which to explore the complexities of post-war rural life, gender dynamics, and the intersection of practical necessity with social and moral expectation. Even today, walking along the old paths near the cabin site evokes a sense of tension. Trees arch overhead, casting long shadows. The remnants of fences hint at a former order. The ground bears subtle signs of movement, as if the land itself retains memory. Visitors speak of the uncanny feeling of being observed, of a presence lingering beyond the tangible, a quiet reminder of the household that once maintained a delicate equilibrium of risk, cooperation, and secrecy. The narrative endures not in records or artifacts, but in the psychological and emotional imprint left on the landscape and the collective memory of those who lived nearby. Ultimately, the story of the brothers and the woman challenges conventional interpretations of domestic life. It reveals how human behavior can adapt under pressure, how coordination and authority can coexist with fear and uncertainty, and how communities respond to what they cannot fully understand. The mystery is sustained not only by the lack of concrete detail, but by the enduring tension between the extraordinary and the ordinary, between survival and social expectation, and between reality and the stories we tell to make sense of it. The farm itself, now overgrown and silent, is a testament to endurance and ambiguity. It is a place where human ingenuity, tension, and secrecy intersected, leaving traces that invite speculation. The inhabitants, whose identities remain obscured, whose motives and methods remain partially hidden, continue to live on in memory and narrative. Their story offers a quiet reflection on human resilience, the shaping of legend, and the subtle horror inherent in the intersection of isolation, social pressure, and survival. In the final analysis, the cabin stands as both a historical site and a psychological artifact. It represents the delicate balance between the visible and the hidden, the extraordinary and the mundane, the understood and the unknowable. The story leaves a lingering impression, a household that managed chaos with precision, a community that observed with fascination and fear, and a landscape that absorbed the echoes of human tension, preserving them for generations to come. The question remains, suspended like a shadow in the Mississippi twilight. Did the equilibrium endure beyond the immediate events? And does some trace of the household's presence still whisper through the trees, waiting for those who dare to listen?